Welcome back to another adventure of the Adventure Box podcast. This is given to you by Historical Conquest, a game that teaches history by just having fun. Okay, so last time we were talking about the Northwest Coast culture. I finally got it down. Okay, Northwest Coast culture. That's all the indigenous that came down from after going over the Bering Straits, came down through Alaska and settled on the coast, the West Coast, mainly around Southeast Alaska, Canada, and also Washington and Oregon. Before that, we talked about the Arctic, which then became the Inuits. That was the Arctic culture. Now we're going to be talking about another group. This one is fascinating. They're all fascinating. It's so amazing to see what you get to learn about these people. But what's really cool, I'm going to bring up the map. And excuse me, because, oops, that's not the map. That was supposed to be the map. There's the map. Okay, that is something we will talk about in just a few minutes. So this, I say excuse me because if you're looking at our YouTube channel and not the podcast, you will see that there's a lot of fires going on right now. All the red dots are the fires throughout the country and through Canada, and they have increased overnight, basically. So there are a lot of fires going on all over Alaska, Canada, and down into Washington, California, and such. One of our salespeople is at this big one, which is near Chico, just above Sacramento, California. So in northern California. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the Adena and Hopewell cultures. So coming over the Bering Straits from Siberia and Russia into Alaska, they broke into two. There was the Arctic culture and the Northwest Coast culture. Now, as they continued to travel down, another group broke off, and they kept going until they got over here. Oh, for some reason, I have the roads. Let's turn this off. Nope, roads are still there. I wish we didn't have roads in Google Maps. Let's see if I can turn all these off. Yes, there we go. Okay, get rid of all those maps. You get the regular main streets and thoroughways, but this is the image of, let's see, Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, and Kentucky. These are the main places that the Hopewell and the Adena tribes were at. So you have everywhere from Kansas City all the way to West Virginia, from Chicago all the way down to Tennessee. That's the area that they congregated around. Now, interesting enough, this is actually one of the reasons why they congregated in this area is because you have both the Missouri River coming through, the Mississippi River coming through, and a whole lot of other smaller rivers coming through, all heading down south. And why? Because remember, everything that they do, all the things that the indigenous or the Native Americans do, is because they want to survive. Yes, that's the important part. They want to survive, which means they have to find ways of transporting things. They have to find ways of connecting with other people, especially in their same culture, but different tribes or different families that are in different areas. This is where they might have to defend against someone or even attack another tribe. These are all built. The reason for any placement of a village is because of survival. Also, with that survival is also the following of food. So when the Adena and Hopewell, when that group came down, they were coming down because of food. They followed the food and where it went. Now, when they settled around the, again, Neolithic era, around 1000 BC, this was where they started to congregate into their own villages. They moved away from families. People would join from other tribes. Yes, there was some intermarriage between different tribes. Some people didn't like it. Some people did. They were almost outcasts at that time. But they'd move off to another area and start their own family. And so there's a lot of these tribes. Most of them would be the same tribe, just in different areas, because they were basically family, but from different areas. So I've got a picture for you. I actually showed it just a second ago, but I've got a picture of it instead. So let's bring the picture. Whoops. That's not the picture I wanted. And the picture's not coming up. Okay. So let's bring up, here we go. So this, oh, the reason why it's coming up is because, yep, it is an image. I'm going to open this with photos just a little bit better. Okay. So you come up, you're walking through, say you're traveling west, and you're going through a lot of plains, a lot of trees, and all these different areas. Everything's basically flat. If they're not flat, they're in mountains or big hills. And then all of a sudden you come to something like this. Basically a mound, probably about 20 to 30 feet wide, about 10 feet tall. That's about the height of a human or a little bit more. The one behind it is a lot more than a human. And you think, wow, that's interesting that Earth would just collect like that. That's what you think, right? You would think that that's just an Earth mound, something that happened naturally in Earth. Except if you dig a little deeper, or actually you continue walking and you get over to like the St. Louis area, this is what you would receive. This is what you would see. It's right on the edge of the river, of the Mississippi River. What's interesting about this is it's completely 100% man-made. This is Monk Mound, or to others, it would be Coatia Mound, Cahokia Mound. So the Cahokia Mound is a mound found in basically the St. Louis area. You can go visit it. I just visited it last year, and it was a great visit. It was very interesting, all the different things that were there. This is a mound where you actually get to climb up, and there's a terrace area, which means at some point there may have been just this level, and then they added on afterwards to create a second level. Now, you walk up these steps, that's not too much. You then work up a second set of steps, you're getting a little winded because it is tall. It's like 50 feet tall, 40 to 50 feet tall. This is, again, something that the Hopewell Indians actually created, man-made. One of the things that they believe when they did this, let me show you the next picture. Oops. Next picture. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit into this. As you can see, it's very flat around it. Well, they actually created huge walls of timber, trees stuck in the ground to create huge walls all the way around this. And not just like right around this, it actually went out further. It was far out where the walls were. And they think that there were people that lived inside. And then those that were on the top, those that were the most important, would live on the mound. Also from the mound, you can see in like every direction. I wish I had my pictures up that I could show you. These one I actually had to steal off the internet. But if you look out, you can see across the river. You can see people from 100 miles away. So if there's a Native American tribe trying to attack, you'd see it. So there are mounds like this all over this area. And I visited a few of them. Now, interesting enough, usually you can't go inside. Usually it's just built up to earth. Some of them you can actually get inside and see inside. So like if you look in the picture that I have right here, this was an earth lodge created by the same type of people, the Hopewell. Now, interesting enough, with this, there are actually ceremonies that you can do inside and such. But this was not normal. They didn't normally live inside the mounds. The mounds were something else. Okay, so say you see a mound like this. And again, if you don't see it, if you're on the podcast, you'll see a mound with a whole bunch of trees sticking out of it. So one of the things that's great about this is these are potentially where people were buried. I'm going to actually skip 2 images. This image shows what was happening inside the mounds. They were buried, some of them, not all of them, were burial plots. So to get a little bit more in depth, they would dig down into the earth and bury a group of people down there. This could be, I mean, I don't think anyone truly understands what it is. This is all based on theories and assumptions of what these mounds were. But you'd have a group of people buried. most likely it would be like a family that was buried. Almost think of it as today you'd have a group plot in a cemetery. So my family has this area that they purchased that had my grandparents on it. Well, it also has my father in there. And when my mom passes away, she will be buried with her casket on top of my father's. And then there's a place for each of her siblings around it. So my grandparents decided early how they were going to do their burials. Well, so interesting enough, in these burial sites, you may find a large group of people all buried at the same time. It could have been because of a famine. It could have been because of a disease. It could have been for just a year's worth of burials. And they bury them in this mound. They'd have smaller ones as well when they added on. Now, think of it this way. Now, they're done with that burial. They cover it up and it's a small mound. Well, later on, they come back and there's somebody else from the family that passed away. And so they have someone else they want to add to the burial site. Now, in some places like Egypt, you would have people, like all their servants and all their slaves would be killed and put into in the pyramid with the pharaoh, so that in the next life, those servants or slaves could serve the pharaoh. Well, that was their culture. That was their religion. This one, there's no telling if that was actually for a certain person or group of people, such as like slaves or something. This was more likely family. And then they'd build it up a little bit, and it was a little mound. And then they'd add on top with additional people that would die afterwards. So the mound would get larger as you go. So they would also put in there sticks and other things to keep this as an actual mound. Again, you pile up a bunch of dirt, the water, the rains, everything will come down and it will wash it away. This place is right next to the Mississippi, or some of these mounds are next to the Mississippi. What's going to happen when the floods come? It's going to erode away some of these mounds, which Monk Mound or Calatia Mound, this one right here, this actually has eroded away. Some of this erosion has happened over the years because this Mississippi that's right there flooded and washed some of it away. Okay, so is this the only kind of burial mounds that they have, or earth mounds that the Hopewell are famous for? No, actually, I'll go back one more. There are massive earthworks that are created all throughout this area. These are the mound people. So the reason why the Adena and the Hopewell are a lot of times talked about together is because they both did this. They both made these grand pieces of earthwork, and no one knows completely why they're put together. But we have assumptions such as, again, burial plots, ceremonial. For one instance, there is actually, I can't remember exactly where it was. I'll have to find out. But there's the river, and then right next to the river, you have this really big mound. And then off to the side, you actually have different mounds encircling this one big mound. So the people are supposedly not buried around the mound, but that's where they sat. That's where they listened to the people, their spiritual leaders, their military and government leaders. All these people were doing these things. But there's some really interesting ones. So a lot of these, you don't really know exactly why that was done. It could have also been because that's where their huts were. And they had the earth move around where the huts were to be able to show, or to the paths that they took and things like that. Again, no one's 100% sure, but let's see. This one is an interesting one. This is one of the most well-known non-mound like earthworks. Some people think it's a snake with its wrapping coil going further and further away from it. Some people believe that's a constellation that people were mapping out in ancient times. There are so many different thoughts and everything of how these people lived, but we're not 100% sure. Again, we weren't there. All we have is the tales and the archaeology that we found. But think of it this way, none of these people wrote down what they believed or in their thoughts. none of them wrote down what these mounds were for. So all we can do is try to not disturb the mound itself, but sometimes nowadays for archaeology, they actually x-ray them to find out what these mounds were. Early in history, actually, a lot of farmers and such, they didn't like the mounds, so they basically dug them under. They tore up the land, or the mounds, to be able to use that land for food. A lot of these mounds are still here, and a lot of them we don't disturb because they are native sites, but we can now x-ray down into the ground exactly what's underneath. So these are great things that we've been able to do in recent years. Now, how did they survive? How did these people live? They didn't live in the mounds. No, they lived in huts. This is like a hut that they would have built with thatched roofs made up of pine needles and branches and such. The building itself would be stick framed, much like what we do these days, except we don't stick them into the ground. The timber, we don't turn them and stick them into the ground. We have a foundation. But these people didn't mind much about that. They stick them into the ground, and then what they do, they build twigs or branches between those, and they use mud and hay to basically, it's almost like a stucco and adobe or a lath and plaster. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically where you put up a wire mesh and then you cover it with a type of concrete. Well, these days they didn't have concrete, not in this culture. As we saw down in the Aztec, they had concrete, but these, instead of doing concrete, they did mud because they had plenty of it. Again, they were right offside the Mississippi River. So they bring mud and they'd cover their walls with mud, which insulated them, not just from the cold, but the heat. Remember, this is the Ohio, Missouri, Kentucky area, which is very humid. There's so many lakes and it's hot. So all that humidity from the lakes comes up into the air and you're like drenched when you're working outside. So these people would be working and then they want to go into somewhere that's cool. You know, usually what you do is go under a tree, right? Well, here, if you prepare the roof right and you do stucco, basically mud, on the outside of the building, you go inside and it's nice and cool, temperate inside. Still humid because the humidity, there's nothing that stops that. At least with shade, you're stopping the sun from hitting you. So it's a little bit cooler in these areas. And actually in these areas, that humidity, because of the cooler temperatures inside, the humidity would actually help to cool down the people inside. So sometimes it's really hard. Being, again, in Kansas City and being on the West Coast or the East Coast a lot, there's a lot of humidity here. And sometimes it's hard when you're camping out to get dry. Okay, what else did they have? This is another drawing of some of their structures. This would be more like a clan house. This is where the different tribal leaders and such would come together and talk and make decisions. And they had to have, these are either bark, what is encasing this stick-built building would be either bark, like large pieces of pine, of tree bark, or it'd be mud made into basically like scales. And what this would be doing is it's easier to place it up there to be able to keep this all together. As you saw on the last structure, the hut, they would actually have to intertwine branches in order to get mud to stick in there. Well, that's a lot of effort for a place so big. So they would put them together and have blocks of this mud dried out that they'd be able to put in place, secure in place. So these are some great things. Now, what about other things that we found about these cultures? Again, because we weren't there. Right now, a lot of things are assumptions or theories. So let's go into some of the things that we found with this, the Hopewell and Adena culture. Now, again, they're in this area. It's actually a lot larger than that. This is more the Adena area. So it's smaller. It's basically like Ohio and Pennsylvania, parts of, oh, crud. I forgot my states. Ohio and crud. Wow. See, okay. Even adults make mistakes when it comes to this. Ohio. Yeah. Sorry, Indiana is what I was thinking about. And Ohio area. Going a little bit into the Pennsylvania, a little bit into the West Virginia that area. This is more the Adena area, while this is more the Hopewell area. They were pretty big. The Hopewell basically encircled the Adena. And they actually, a lot of them worked together. Okay, so going back to the picture, there was galena, a material made found there. Obsidian was found there. River rock flint was found there. Also copper. And you don't see it here, but also silver. But here's some interesting things. So there is shark teeth that has been found around the Adena people. There is mica also found there. And last one, marine shells. Now remember, they're like 700 miles away from the coast. There's no coast. Was there marine shells in the Great Lakes? Yes, there is shell life in there. And so you would find that. Shark teeth? Yeah, there might be some, but not that much. So it's really interesting that they would have this, but that just shows the kind of trade that they would do as well. I got one more picture for you before we go more into what the curriculum is talking about. Now, this is interesting. This is back, oh, I wish I remember. I wish I got a picture of this. Maybe I can find it really fast. This is a picture of, take this off here. This is a picture of all the tools that were found. These were like obsidian tools and such. Okay, so I don't have that website that I was looking at and the documentation on this, but these were just a pile of tools that these early settlers or early archaeologists had found when digging up some of these mounds and some of these areas. So that's a lot, and I think that was obsidian that you find there. So there's just a lot of different things. So you have everything from pipes that were found, arrowheads, mica, copper figure pottery, and other artifacts that were found in these mounds. And again, early farmers, like I was telling you, they would mow down a mound in order to make it into farming land. We actually had one probably about 5 miles from here. And there used to be like multiple mounds in this plot of land. And the farmer came in and knocked them all down before the last one. When they found out he was knocking them down, they finally came in and stopped him from plowing down the last one. But it's this mound. It's basically like 6 feet tall. So the tall height of a human, probably 30 feet wide. But in these things, you actually find all these different artifacts that were there. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into the curriculum. Now that we've gone over a lot of what the Hopewell and Adena were and what they did, let's put this back over here so you can see a little bit of the placing. Let's go a little bit to the maps. Okay, so while I'm talking about this, I will refer to this map a little bit. Okay, so what was happening around the world around 1000 BC? Okay, 1000 BC, it was the Iron Age. This is when they actually started to use iron, smelting, learning to melt iron to create tools, to create weapons. Africa, in the African history that we're going to be doing next month in the ancient civilization, you'll actually see where they're one of the first that actually created smelting, which is melting down the iron to create tools and weapons. This group, not really. Now, iron at least. You did see that they made copper, they made silver, they made things out of those because they were soft, easier to melt. Iron, it's a lot higher temperature to be able to melt it and turn it into tools. And they didn't have the smelting process, which they did have in places like Africa, or even down in the South America and Central America. So ongoing is the rise of classical civilizations. Again, this is coming to the Neolithic era. And the Neolithic era is basically when the civilizations came together. They stopped being hunters and gatherers where they just travel everywhere, being nomadic. They actually settled down into areas. Then they would break off and create different tribes from different families. So a family member would leave a family, usually joining with another tribal person from another tribe, and create their own civilization. A lot of times because they weren't accepted by those in both cultures. So they make their own culture, their own tribe. I shouldn't say culture because they're all based on the same culture. As part of the Adena and Hopewell culture, you'll actually see one of the big things that they shared was creating earth mounds. These earth structures were shared between the two. A lot of the other places, you don't see these. I mean, one big thing is the fact that it was so easy to move dirt. Here, well, in Kansas City, I'm in Clay County, and it is named after basically the clay that's like a foot down, and it's really hard to move that stuff. But Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois, even going into Missouri, the earth here is very easy to move. And so creating earth mounds was nearly easy to do. Now we're going to, in the curriculum, you actually get to see a little bit of the difference between the Hopewell and the Adena. But all other things that they shared were different types of artwork. There was a lot of similarities between the two. Trade networks, they would trade between the two. Basically, they were almost the same group that came down and settled in this area. This area, again, right here. And they came from up north down into this area. So what other things were happening during this time? So you'll see in the curriculum basically walking through how these different things in global history influenced this group. So the next one is the Silk Road trade. So that was like 130 BC to about 1453 AD. This is about the time of the Age of Exploration, when again Columbus no longer can go over the ocean, over the land, because the Ottoman Empire took over much of the Middle East, blocking all transportation into India and into the eastern side of the Middle East and into China. The Ottoman Empire controlled a lot of that. And if you were caught trying to travel and you weren't on their best, if you did not have the best wishes, you become slaves to them, and they would sell you on the slave market. Ottoman Empire was hard on this. But again, the Silk Road during this time was actually before that. Ottoman Empire wouldn't even come up because Islam didn't even come up until about after 300 AD. Okay, next, the Roman Empire. Again, during the time of the Hopewell and the Adena, there was the Roman Empire. Now, these didn't have much influence on the Adena and Hopewell, but these were massive things that were happening that started setting things in motion. The Roman Empire took over, and they ruled from 27 BC, and actually before, but that wasn't the Roman Empire. This would be the Roman Empire, 27 BC to 476 AD. Again, remember, the Adena and the Hopewell only lasted from about 1000 BC to 200 AD. And that's when they all started becoming all these different tribes in that area, breaking off from their families or their groups and making other tribes and groups. Again, sharing a lot of the same culture, but not sharing the same location, trying to create their own place. Okay, so in here, we're also going to talk about some of the thoughts on the mystery of where they came from, the decline of the Hopewell and Adena. Some things that I want to point out is that there was social and political changes. Again, people take over, they destroy records, they force people out, people leave because of them. So there was a lot of social and political changes that were being made, and that's why people would leave families and go to somewhere else. Other things is the decline of the Hopewell culture is often associated with the end of the Hopewell interaction sphere. This is interesting. A period of extensive trade and cultural exchange among ancient people in the eastern United States. By the 5th century AD, 5th century, so 500 AD, this network began to unravel, leading to gradual declines in Hopewell influence and the disbursement of its people. So, around the 500 AD, now we say in here, what did we say, 200 AD? I think we said 200 AD, but that's when it started to decline, up to about 500 AD. So there was a gradual decline. Again, it's all built in mystery, because again, we don't know everything that was happening. We weren't there. Okay, so some of the other things that I want you to learn about is the type of people that were there. There were, in the Adena culture, there were Adena priestesses. So you'd have male religious leaders, but you also have female religious leaders here. The Adena craftsmen. So yes, you had craftsmen that would make tools. I mean, we talked about that in the Northwest coast culture and also the Arctic. Those were very prominent things. But in the Hopewell, so the Adena were more on religious, though they did have chiefs. You also had in the Hopewell chiefs. That was a big thing. It was more male dominated, while the Adena was more female matriarch society. And so, and that again, assumption. The woman had a little bit higher influence in this area because their priestess would have higher influence. Not all of them, but there's a lot of differences there. Hopewell traders. And so getting to know that is very important. Now, one of the things that I wanted to explain to you is, remember yesterday we said that one of the main things in the life lessons that you can learn is that in the Northwest coast culture, it was all about community. If you were going to, and also the Arctic, if you were going to beach a whale, you couldn't go as a family. You couldn't go as an individual. You had to go as a community. And then harvesting it, the animal was too big, you'd have to harvest it together. And so with this group, there's no big projects like that. So their importance was not as much in community as the family life and the family household roles as well. That's one of the big things about it. So yes, they had their culture, their group that they were with. But in this culture, the family was the most important. And then the culture was outside of that. So like second importance. We're going to go through in here. There's more on the archaeological findings, some of them that we talked about. There are also more life lessons, including like respecting the nature around you, inspecting the environment that was around you. Like we were talking about with the Arctic, actually the North, not as much the Northwest coast culture, but more of the Arctic. If you went out and whaled and fished until they were all gone, you wouldn't be preparing yourself for the future, and you'd be disrespecting the environment. In Alaska, nowadays, those people that are there, the Inuits that are there, they want to fish as much as possible because there's not much to do in villages in the middle of nowhere. We call them the bush. And so these people, they want to go out and to be able to do what they used to do. Fish, hunt, do those things. Now Alaska has Alaska Fish and Game, which I worked for. Again, I was in construction, not the other side. And so in this, the people are actually finding out that we're not allowed to keep up with our culture because one, they outlawed whaling, and then they finally brought it back for the Native Americans. Later on, they had to regulate the amount of fishing, and they closed down fisheries, mainly because the Native Americans, instead of just feeding their family, which they used to do, and it doesn't take that many fish to feed a village. It does take a lot of fish if you're selling them to a cannery, which now the canneries have created a place in that area, mostly owned by tribes, and those canneries would ship it all around the world. And so if those Inuits that are up there are hunting all year round, there won't be any fish. So what do? And it's not all year round. In the whole time that the fish are flowing in the rivers, there won't be any fish. If you don't replenish the fish that are coming upstream to go spawn, which means to have babies, to lay their eggs, then there won't be another set to go out. Just so you know, salmon, which is the main food source of some of these people up there, they would spawn. They would go out, they wouldn't spawn. They would be born in lakes. They'd travel out as they grow, and they'd spend about 5 years out in the ocean, and then they'd come back the exact same rivers and go to the same lakes where they were born, and they would lay their eggs there. And what's interesting about that is Fish and Game had to regulate how much fish we were allowing the Native Americans in that area to fish, because if they decimated the population, 5 years later, the new babies that were supposed to, the next year, when those babies are supposed to be born, there'd be less of them. So 5 years later, after they've lived out in the ocean, when they came back, there wouldn't be any. So there's a deep-rooted reason for always respecting the environment, especially if you're a fisherman or a hunter. You should be number one when it comes to being the environmentalists. And I'm not saying uh, using electric cars and getting rid of power plants and things like that. I'm talking about no poaching, hunting the amount that you're supposed to compared to the state's fish and game. There's a reason for that. You should be helping the population to regrow and not over hunting, because you want to be hunting for the rest of your life and into your grandkids' lives. And the only way that's going to happen is if you respect the land. Okay, so we got some great vocabulary words, including burial mounds, uh, archaeological evidence. Again, a lot of the stuff that we're finding out is because of archaeology. Earthwork, artifacts, heritage, and such. You're going to see a bunch of them in your curriculum. Now here comes the really fun ones. We're going to actually give you opportunities to create earth mounds. Now, the first one is a very simple one. It's for grades 3 through 6. But if you want to, you can actually create your own. Model it or go make it in the backyard. Ask your parents first. You don't want to do with it. Dig a big hole in the backyard, your parents are going to be a little bit upset. But if you can dig a hole in the backyard and fill it with certain things like a time capsule and then cover it up, create a mound, make a marker. These are really fun experiments that you can do. Now, your parents might not want you to, or you don't have the land to do it. Well, design one, draw it, make it out of paper mache, out of clay, and put in there what was in those burial mounds as you see them. Go online, see some pictures of them. I showed you one, but see the pictures that are in there. Find out where you would want to be buried and where other people would be buried. Bury. I'm laughing because it's funny. Don't take this seriously. Create a burial mound for your family in paper mache, clay, or drawing. Create a trade network map. How would you trade with your family? Say each member of your family is a different culture, or sorry, a different tribe. How would you separate them, create a map, and show how you would trade with them? So, very interesting. I'm done with the curriculum. I wanted to tell you something that has to do with this. So, my family is actually doing this right now, but we're not doing it in this same way. We're actually doing it on Minecraft. So, we brought up Minecraft, and each of us are creating our own trading stores. So one person trades ore, one person trades food, one person trades livestock, and we're learning how to trade between them. And the thing is, because on Minecraft anyone can be any of them, and it could be all of them, but we're trying to teach them about trading and how to work together. So this is another way of doing this. See if your parents will allow you and allow them to get Minecraft. Now, if you have a tablet like a Kindle, you can actually get it for free. And you connect yourself through a server, which our server is over Aternos, ATERNOS.org, I think. Let me see it right here. Aternos, Aternos.org and the server. I can't show you my server, sorry. Yes, this is one of the servers that we use, and our family goes in and we actually create this civilization. I'm actually going to probably block that out so you don't see it, just because it's my family experiment. And so we're doing a community. And last week, my wife finally joined us. She's not the video game type person, but she joined us, and now she's creating her own house for the first time, learning how to use Minecraft. And then she's going to join the trade network as well. So it's all really fun, but it actually teaches you a lot about the people we're learning about. So try that out if you want. I mean, you can actually tell your parents, Mr. Edwards told me to do this. Historical Conquest told me to do this. In the future, though, we're going to have our own program where you can do nearly the same thing. It's going to be so much cool. It's going to be so much fun. It's a $2 million project. And right now we don't have the money, so we're actually going to get help from other organizations to be able to fund this program. So if you ever wanted to invest in anything, Zogos Gaming is now investing or going open for investors. We have a $50,000 match, so we're trying to find other investors that can match part of that. And with that, be able to create this simulation game. And it's a simulation engine that is like nothing ever before. Can't wait to show it to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us on this great day with the Adventure Box podcast, and we will catch you next time. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.